Welcome back to the Money and Wealth Show. I'm Sterling Fox in conversation with Dave Skarica from addictedtoprofits.net. Now, Dave, just before we went to break, we were talking about real estate, and you mentioned bubbles bursting, and I want to come right back to that, and then we'll move on to commodities. I know you have some thoughts on that, but housing prices, not just in Vancouver, now the most expensive place on the planet, but housing prices in Canada have gone up considerably in the last 2 years, close to 25% in some markets. How long can this acceleration sustain, and would you define this growth as a bubble?
I don't know if it's a bubble, but it's I think it's frothy and the market is overvalued, especially when despite the fact that Canada in the long run is going to benefit from what's going on in Asia, because that will, in the long run, increase demand for commodities and help a lot of aspects of the Canadian economy. And our economy is a lot more fundamentally sound than the United States right now. But I think you still have to be worried about the fact when your biggest trading partner and, the 800-pound gorilla next door, the States, has essentially gone into a serious recession and is in the midst of kind of a bursting debt bubble and building a government debt bubble, that you have to think that's going to have an effect on the Canadian economy and housing down the line. But again, we look at the bubble. We talked about prices are falling. Mm-hmm. And you were mentioning to me beforehand that, a lot of the speculation in Vancouver is you have Asian money that comes here and guys buy 10 or 12 apartments and they rent them out.
That's the way it used to be, yeah.
And Asian family money tends to be not very leveraged, in that Hong Kong fell by 70% in value in 1997 during the Asian crisis. But because everyone there buys in cash or only put 70 or 80% down, you never had any banking blow-ups over there and that sort of thing. So you have to look at what's the makeup of the market. If people are really that leveraged, like the average Canadian, if they're the ones speculating, but if it's then foreigners who are speculating with that aspect, well, then you're probably going to be you're going to have a little cushion. But the interesting thing is that usually bubbles, and I did a study on this, take about 2 to 3 years to really blow up. Like if you look at the housing stocks, they peaked in 2005. And of course, it was 2007 that we really started getting problems in subprime, in 2008 when everything fell apart. Mm-hmm. The NASDAQ, which peaked in 2000, by mid-2002 had fallen 80% in value. The Nikkei peaked in last trading day 1989. So basically early 1990. By mid-1992, 2.5 years later, it had fallen 65%. So it's about 2 to 3 years.
There's that delay time.
There's that's when you go from top to bottom on the first move.
Now, you talked about London a few minutes ago, and how when their correction occurred, prices only fell approximately 20%.
Yeah.
Versus the crashing of prices that we've seen in the United States. Yeah. If there is a correction rather than a bubble burst in Canada, would that pattern of London with a dip of 20% or less be more likely in Canada than, say, a loss of house value of 50%, as has occurred in so many areas of the States?
I think that if you're looking at 50%, you'd be looking more at condos, because condos, that's always where the oversupply is. Okay. So, yeah, I think in the housing market, you should look at 20 to 30%. And I know, for example, my father recently, he lives from Ontario, and he recently sold his house, and he didn't get anything out of the ordinary for it. And I know a lot of Toronto and Ontario is overvalued, but it's not, again, I think the real frothy parts are actually where we are right now.
Okay.
I think that's if there is a bubble, that's probably where it is. And again, if you're like me and you're a longer term bull on commodities, oil and gas, gold prices, all these things going up in value, that probably means after this little, pullback a place like Calgary's had, or a place like Saskatchewan, longer term, those real estate prices are probably going to do quite well in the next 5, 10, 15 years. Especially Saskatchewan. I'm very bullish in Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan is a happening place. They've got a government in there with Premier Wall, who's finally declared the province to be not only business friendly, but actually open for business. Yes. They're really going after the uranium global markets. It's a happening economy, isn't it?
No, and that's not only uranium. They have coal, diamonds, gold. A lot of the oil sands kind of come over into Saskatchewan, very similar geological makeup. So yeah, that is a place that's really interesting. And what makes it interesting about it is they haven't grown in 100 years. In 1900, roughly, the population of Saskatchewan was 1 million people.
Well, and the two main industries of the province for the last century have been packing and leaving.
Exactly.
So all of a sudden, we've got a turnaround.
Well, what I was saying is now it's still 1 million people.
Right.
So they haven't had no net migration. So that means I think it's going to be, ironically, a place that people end up migrating to. So, I was actually, they had a conference a few years ago called Skarica, which is a Saskatchewan mining conference, and I happened to be the first keynote speaker at their conference, and you could just see things where they're very early inception of happening. So, I talked about the weather here, and now the province of Saskatchewan, you got to deal with those winters.
It's a bit nippy.
It's a bit nippy, but if you can do that, it's probably a place to look to make, if you're looking at investment property or that sort of thing. Saskatchewan is very interesting right now,
Dave, tell us about your website. I've mentioned addictedtoprofits.net a few times. I haven't called you the Chartmeister yet, so I got to slide that one in because you're a very chart-oriented guy, very visual guy.
Yeah.
Tell us about the site and perhaps an offer or two you might have for our viewers today here on Check TV.
Yeah, actually, if you go to my website, addictedtoprofits.net, quite simply, you'll see a link there to sign up for a free version of the newsletter. It's not a free sample. It's actually much better than that. We do weekly updates. We give you a good sampling of what the newsletter is right. And best of all, you have access to a special discounted rate of 50% off the regular price by signing this up. And not only that, and we were talking about international mining and investing here, I'm starting an international investment website, investment service, and a technical trading service. And I'm going to be doing an offer here in late February, early March for people who sign up for that. It's going to be a one-time only, all three of these services for the price of one. So sign up to the free newsletter to get access to that.
All right, so addictedtoprofits.net is the place to go for all you need from David Skarica. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you. When that new book comes out, I feel another show coming on.
You'll get a free copy.
All right. That's it for this week's edition of the Money and Wealth Show.